It's great to be joined today by Anders Ericsson, who is the Conradi Eminent Scholar of Psychology at Florida State University and also co-author with Robert Poole of Peak: Secrets from the New Science of Expertise. This is such a fascinating topic to me, and there have been sort of more pop science writings about this issue, including, of course, from Malcolm Gladwell and the idea of 10,000 hours to develop expertise in different fields. And you really study this from an academic point of view. And so I want to sort of start at the very top level. When we talk about the sort of concept of practice makes perfect or practice improves, what do we know about the types of practice and experimentation that do help develop skills and the types that are not so useful?
Well, I think that's a key idea. And what we've found when we've analyzed basically professionals and other individuals who just keep practicing and sort of engaging in the domain, the surprising finding is that people don't get any better. So you can have spent 10 years in a domain and you can't really demonstrate that you're much better than you were after the first year or so. Uh, Now, what we found is that people who actually do get better, they do that not by just practicing and engaging in the domain, but they actually set aside time where they identify goals that they work on that are specifically now allowing them to get immediate feedback and get a chance here of practice over and over. Uh, my favorite example is actually when you're playing doubles tennis. And let's say that you miss a backhand volley. Well, the game is just going to go on. You're not going to get any opportunities to do a better shot. Uh, and if it happens again here, maybe 30 minutes later, you're not any more likely to be successful than you were the first time. Contrast that with working now with a tennis coach who can basically now allow you to stand there being ready to receive the volleyball, the volley, and then make it incrementally harder when you've established sort of the correct fundamentals. And then, he can allow you to run up to the net to basically do the volley and then finally integrate it in the tennis game. Our argument is that 1 hour with a coach like that is going to improve your backhand so much more than maybe years or even decades of just playing more tennis.
So we can sort of apply the concept to many fields, for example, medicine or aviation. There's sort of the general common sense or conventional wisdom sometimes that the pilot or the doctor with 25 years experience is going to necessarily be better than the one with 4 to 6. But what you're actually saying is if that pilot or doctor is not really stretching their capabilities or learning new things during that 20 to 25 year period, there's really no guarantee that they're going to necessarily be better. Is that true?
No, that's exactly right. It sort of makes sense. If you keep doing what you're doing, all you're going to be doing is automating and maybe making it less effortful to be able to do it. And what we're arguing here, if you're going to change your performance and making it better, it's not going to happen by chance. It's going to happen because you're monitoring what you're doing and then deliberately trying to change that aspect of your performance. And we basically argue that deliberate practice, when you're actually working with a teacher who's been teaching other people to make the same improvements that you're trying to do, that's when you have the optimal conditions for learning, because the teacher would also know what it is that you can change easily given your level of skill, and also what kind of training activities have been shown to be effective for other individuals.
There have been some very interesting studies done in terms of remembering longer and longer strings of numbers. So sometimes starting with, a 3-digit number and going to 4, etc. And looking at what sort of practice techniques help someone to be able to remember a longer and longer string of numbers. Can you talk to us a little bit about sort of the general principles of how if I recall correctly, the average person can sort of comfortably remember a 7 or 8 digit number in their short term memory and repeat it back to someone. Talk to us about what has been discovered about the types of practice that help someone to drastically improve upon that.
Right. You know what most people would do probably if they encountered the need here to remember phone numbers, is just to kind of rehearse them in their head as they're kind of keying them in. Now, what we found was when we actually identified a college student who was willing to kind of be involved in some training, that when we tested him, over time he realized that he could dramatically improve his performance if he focused in on 3 digits together in a group and then actually tried to form meaningful connections to things he knew. He was a runner, so he tended to actually prefer to encode these digit sequences as running times. Now, what is really the most important thing is that instead of just rehearsing where you're now drawing on that kind of loop of information you can hold on to for only, a number of seconds, to encoding it in long-term memory where you can actually hold on to that information for very long periods of time. That actually opens up now the opportunity for improving performance on that task. And over about 400 hours of training, his performance increased from 7 digits in the beginning to over 80-digit long strings that he could basically repeat back when they were read at 1 digit per second.
That sort of gets me to the idea of practice and the concept of practice makes perfect versus some kind of what we might call natural ability or talent. So I'd be curious to hear from you. And if you have to distinguish between, for example, physical activities and activities that maybe don't rely as much on strength or agility or speed or whatever, what have you learned about the idea of can any human, given sort of normal conditions, be taught and practiced to the point of being proficient or expert at almost anything? How much does natural ability play a role? And if we have to distinguish between types of tasks or jobs or areas, that's absolutely fine.
Well, since we started with this memory work, I've been kind of reviewing and looking for evidence that there are basically innate gifts or abilities that some people kind of discover that they have. And I've yet to find a compelling example of that. So in all the cases where people are able to do extraordinary things, there's always a practice history that seems to be, potentially sufficient to explain what they're able to do. What we do find is that the amount of time that individuals like musicians have spent practicing in order to be able to do the things that we see them do was much greater than most people thought. And I guess Malcolm Gladwell, when he saw our research, kind of came up with this idea of a 10,000 hour rule that you would have to practice for 10,000 hours. Unfortunately, he did not describe all the aspects of what we felt were necessary for that kind of improvement. So we were talking about deliberate practice where you have a teacher who's guiding a student who's then going off and training by themselves in some, music training room. Whereas Gladwell was talking more about the number of hours that you were playing in front of audiences like Beatles did in Hamburg. But if you are now working with a teacher, then the kind of improvements that are possible after thousands of hours, I think is just mind-boggling. And we see that as a very general principle across domains where very high levels of performance can be explained or at least related here to the necessary training that preceded actually demonstrating that performance. The only thing that we now know, and it may be that in the future we'll actually find other kind of genetic prerequisites, is height and body size. Because there's no known way here to change your height and increase it by training. That seems to be under genetic control. So obviously, if you want to be a center in NBA, you need to be pretty tall to be competitive.
We are talking about the book Peak Secrets from the New Science of Expertise, that is. The book was co-written with Robert Poole. We've been speaking with the book's other author, Anders Ericsson, Conradi, eminent scholar of psychology at Florida State University. Very, very interesting. Thank you so much for sharing this with us.
Well, my pleasure. Thank you so much.